Hannah, welcome back to the Live and Learn podcast. For those who may not know, Hannah is our lovely resilience SME. We've just recently launched some wonderful resilience content that you helped us put together. For those who are unaware of what you do at all or why we've enlisted you as an SME, do you want to give a bit of background as to why you know lots about this topic?
I work as a professional development consultant. And what that means is that I work with individuals and with teams and organisations to help people be their best selves at work, whatever that looks like. So that might be individual coaching, it might be leadership training, or it might be designing programs for people to spend a period of time, maybe a year, growing their skills in what area they need to grow in to be effective in the workplace. And a lot of what that builds on for me is my work experience over 30 years, starting in journalism in the 20th century, moving into producing factual TV shows right up until about 10 years ago. And the work that I did has given me the experience, as everyone will have it as well, of being pushed to the edge and to my limits and then coming back and developing survival techniques, essentially to be able to do my job well without falling over.
Today we're actually going to be speaking about stress and burnout, which naturally sound like very bleak topics, but are incredibly topical. And it's stress, especially without putting too fine a point on it. In the world we live in today, it's quite easy to be stressed about stuff. I get very stressed, probably a lot of the time about things I don't need to be stressed about. But slightly philosophically, I guess, to kick us off, do you think a certain degree of stress is inevitable in life?
I do, actually, because what we call stress has been with us since we stood up and walked on two legs. We have a response that a lot of people will have heard of fight, flight or freeze in response to stressful situations. And those first stressful situations were something's going to come and eat me.
Yeah.
Our bodies don't actually know that nothing's going to burst through that door over there now and eat me. So if I'm presented with a threat, I will have a physiological response that will be the equivalent to my caveman ancestor. So stress has been with us as an experience and an emotional response to situations since we began as a species, in the same way that so has happiness and so has anger and so has sadness. These things, when people say, I have anxiety or I have stress, yes, you are experiencing that emotion or that response to that emotion. It's been around forever. It's not a new thing. And so I think it is inevitable.
I guess it's that, yeah, there's nothing new about it at all. It's maybe more that the language around it now is newer and we talk about it more. It's the same, of course, with mental health and things like that we actually, none of them are new concepts. What would you say, well, what causes stress ultimately? If it's inevitable, what are the causes? Because I'm sure if this is something that we're just going to go through life, how can we identify when it happens and how we can stop it is ultimately the goal.
Yeah.
So what causes it?
So there are two types of stress. There's acute, short-lived stress that passes, and then there's chronic, long stress that we have, some people and maybe all of us at some point in our lives live with for what feels like an intolerable amount of time and can often be circumstantial. So I think most people would agree that a little bit of stress can actually be quite useful. As long as it isn't too much and it doesn't last for too long, it can be quite motivating. It helps us get things done.
Yeah.
And stress is a physiological experience, as in it's driven by a hormone, and that hormone is adrenaline. We get an adrenaline surge, and I'm sure, again, most people can recognise that and familiarise themselves with it, that feeling sometimes that cold, almost like a tap has been turned on within you. So there are some chemicals and hormones that are related to some of these experiences that mean that we have a physiological response, and that goes to that fight, flight, freeze. What causes those experiences are events that happen around us that trigger those responses. If I'm feeling under enormous pressure at work and the expectations on me feel that they're too high or there's not enough resource to achieve the thing that I need to do in the time I have available, my physiological response to that would be the same as the caveman's response to the threat that's outside the cave that could come and eat its family.
Yeah.
And the key thing is understanding that that's not going to happen, that our physiological response is ancient, but what causes it are responses to situations.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do we handle those responses?
What's the difference between stress and burnout? Because they too, I think they get conflated and get lumped into the same sentence because of course they relate to each other. But what is the difference between the two?
The difference between stress and burnout is that burnout results from chronic long-term stress. So it is the result of something. Whereas short, sharp, acute stress can sometimes be quite useful.
Yeah.
Because it helps us get things done.
Yeah.
And being under a degree of pressure can be quite enjoyable. We can get a bit of a kick out of it, get a bit of a dopamine hit. Like, I just did this incredible thing. It was horrible while it lasted, but look what I just did.
It's done now, yeah.
So it can be valuable and useful to us, but it can also be a bit addictive, that response that we can get, that dopamine hit that we can get after achieving something. So if we can get hooked into that, and I've personally been there, if we can get hooked into that kind of like, oh, look what I just did. I'm a superhero, just like coming to save the day. Then we can ultimately be the architects of our own burnout. So sometimes burnout is about the expectations that are placed on us, but sometimes also it can be absolutely about how we engage with the work that we're doing and whether we are sucked into a way of working that means that we're not looking after ourselves.
Yeah, and how we sort of abuse our own boundaries with things.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I'm sure probably a lot of people can relate to that, and I've definitely had it myself as well, because I agree that sort of, yeah, I'm being productive, this is amazing, it feels good. It's interesting because the idea of being addicted to stress sounds like a completely bonkers thing, because you think, why the hell would I be addicted to stress? And particularly under the lens of sort of productivity and performance, I can totally see why a lot of people will probably fall into that habit, because it is framed as like you're high performing. In relation then to organisations, the way we're talking about stress, not that of course stress isn't important in its own right and should be taken seriously, but from an organisational perspective, why should we care about stress? If it gets things done in an acute sense, if it gets things done, why is it a problem?
It's important for businesses and for organisations because it's business critical. So if stress turns into burnout, ultimately your best performers will not be working at their best, and worst case scenario, may not even be able to work at all if it tips over into something where they just can't function because that stress has been either too much or not properly managed. There are some really high-profile examples of that in recent times. So Jacinda Ardern, stepping away from her role as the Prime Minister of New Zealand, made global headlines because her reasoning was burnout. Jurgen Klopp stepping away from his role at Liverpool. Joe Wicks, the guy who got us through lockdown, he also stepped away from the media spotlight for a while to recover because he felt that he had burnout. And also Chris Packham, the presenter of Springwatch.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, also made the press, made the front pages of the news because he also said he needed to step away from Springwatch to deal with his burnout. So it's becoming part of the national conversation, which is a good thing. It's a good thing that people are being really honest about it. But that's why it's problematic for companies, because if we drive people too hard, they will ultimately burn out, and then that is when it becomes business critical.
So in that vein, how do we spot the warning signs of stress in ourselves? So how do you recognise when it's going from acute into chronic, verging on burnout? When you're in burnout, how do you know that's all happening? Can you take us through the kind of the tale of stress and burnout?
So let's just refer back to that thing about the fact that stress is a physiological response. So you might get a dry mouth. You might get a raised heartbeat. Emotions are whole body experiences. And when there's some experiments that have been done where putting people through MRI machines and provoking those responses, and you can see it in their bodies. So even the simple things like the emotion of shame, we all see it as red cheeks on an MRI. Similarly, when people are sad or depressed, their body temperature will drop and they will look bluer through an MRI machine than they would if they weren't feeling that way. So paying attention to our bodies is the tell. That's where the tell comes. Paying attention to your body is really important. In addition to that, there are stages and there are certain behaviours that we can notice in ourselves and critically in others as we watch for our colleagues, and also if you're in a leadership role, as you start to notice how people in your team are behaving. So those could be really simple things like feeling snappy or being snappy, less patient with yourself and with others, and less tolerant. So those sort of erratic behaviours can manifest and they can be spotted. Having that level of attention and awareness of what's going on around you and in you are the first signs that you need to possibly take action to prevent yourself getting to that place of burnout.
Yeah. How would you go about approaching speaking to the person about that, or trying to help or support them? Because I can imagine it might not always be the best thing if someone's looking a bit on edge to go up to them and be like, are you stressed? Might not be very useful.
Yeah. I'm not sure how helpful a question, are you stressed, is either, because it's
probably not.
You could argue we're all stressed at some level.
Yeah.
You know, I think the thing that is important in conversations like that is that they are premeditated, as in that they're thoughtful and thought through rather than spontaneous.
Yeah.
And then my starting position is always, I've noticed.
Okay.
So you're not telling anyone anything. You are literally reporting on what you have noticed. So it's not generic, it's specific. Once again, back to specific. I've noticed there were some mistakes.
Yeah.
And you don't make mistakes in your spreadsheets. Or I've noticed in that meeting the other day that you were a bit short with so-and-so. Because if you've noticed it, then you've seen something.
Yeah.
You're not telling anyone anything. You're just reflecting on what you've noticed.
Yeah.
And then the question is there anything going on that I need to know? Or is there anything that you'd like to share with me? So it's questions led, always questions led, and then creating that psychologically safe space tonally for that other person to be able to share. So you don't know which way the answers, because it could be that the answer is, oh God, I'm so pleased you've asked me.
Yeah.
Because X, Y, and Z. And actually, I've got a lot going on at home as well. I can't stay late, so I'm feeling the pressure at work. Then you can have a meaningful conversation around how to relieve some of that pressure.
Yeah.
But also you could be talking to someone who says, no, I'm fine. Because in their mind, they don't want to be seen to be someone who can't cope.
Yes. Yeah.
So you have to adapt how you follow that conversation through and what your instincts are. So no, I'm fine. If instinctively as the leader, I am really certain that things are not fine, I might then lead in to say, oh, it's great to hear that you're enjoying the work.
Yeah.
I would actually like to share some of that work out for the benefit of the project and get another head on it. You're doing an amazing job, but I think it'd be best for everyone if we just, because it's a very short time frame, if we could just sort of share some of that out and get some fresh eyes on it, or whatever you might want to say. But I've noticed that is your opening.
Yeah.
And is there anything, or what would you like to, never like a closed question, what would you like to share? What's going on? You know, how is it going for you with this project? Whatever it is, take it somewhere private. You reflect on what you've noticed, and that is out of character. And then you ask questions around, because they are the special correspondent on themselves. They know themselves. Everyone is different. Everyone has different tolerances. So what can you do to support them in terms of making this more manageable?
Yeah. And coming at it from a inquisitive lens and just sort
curious.
of, drifting back into burnout. Then we talked about spotting the signs of stress. What about the stages of burnout? Once it drifts into the chronic realm, how do you recognize when someone is burnt out? Because I can say from my own experience, sure you can relate as well, of sometimes you're thoroughly in it, or you're even out the other side of it before you realize, oh, hang on, I was burnt out this whole time and I had no idea.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that's annoying about learning in life is that we only, luxury of hindsight, we only realize what we've learned when we've learnt it.
Yeah.
And the process of learning is really painful and just feels deeply uncomfortable.
Yes.
And what can we do to get away from this horrible experience while we're in it? So there are stages of burnout, and there are quite a lot of them. So there are 12 stages of burnout. And I think what's really interesting is you don't have to have them pinned up on your wall to be able to refer to all the time, but it's having an awareness that it's a process.
Yeah.
And the good news about that is you can interrupt that process when you realise what's going on. So whether that's as a leader that needs to stage an intervention or whether it's in yourself. And for me, as somebody who has been burnt out, I think probably several times in my career, but when I was younger, I didn't notice it as much because I was younger.
Yeah.
But what's been really interesting for me is that as a self-employed person, when I left employment 10 years ago, and therefore I am autonomous and there's only me, no one's meeting me for regular one-to-ones, no one's giving me appraisals, no one's giving me feedback, I have a level of accountability to myself that's quite shocking. And what I noticed in the way that I work, and again, everyone will work differently, is that the first stage of burnout is a compulsivity. So I am compelled to keep working on this project, and someone's shouting and saying, supper's up, supper's on the table, I'll just finish this. And I can't quite step away. And that's my decision. No one is telling me that I have to stay until that work is done. And similarly, I've had conversations about this with people who are employed, and I'll say, is it just me that's still at my desk at 8 o'clock when actually none of the things I'm doing have to be done tonight, but I'm still there, that I'm sort of slightly magnetically attached to the keyboard? We get into a rhythm and we get sucked into the achievement, addicted to achievement. I must just finish this. I must just finish this. It's the process that we get addicted to. And so I think that having that awareness now, for me, having been burnt out, I'm really attuned to it of, does this really need to be done right now? And is there anyone else who could be doing this? Do I have to be the one who does this? Because we can be complicit in this. It's not always done to us. We have a responsibility in there. And the moment we realise that responsibility, and it starts with that, generally speaking, is our beginning of awareness around what can we do differently. So that's where it begins. And then 12 steps later, it ends with complete breakdown. So we don't want to get there. We don't want to get to that place. But that's where it begins, interestingly. I can't remember them without looking at my notes, because there's 12 of them. But that's where it starts, and it starts with that compulsion to keep going. So I have definitely worked with people who've said, I'm off. I'm like, what do you mean you're off? Their response to the work that they're being asked to do is very different from mine. So it's about understanding that for me, I can absolutely get seduced into the satisfaction I can experience from working really hard and achieving something. So the compulsion to work can then manifest in a need to work harder. So from that, we move almost seamlessly into neglecting our own needs. You can sort of see the pathway. So in neglecting our own needs, that might be eating properly because you've been working till 9 o'clock and it's just not worth cooking now, so I'll just get a takeaway, or I'll heat up that pot noodle, or whatever it is. We can begin to see that for ourselves, whatever that is, our decompression, our nourishment, our nurturing, whatever that looks like for you in terms of balance, spending time with people, literally feeding yourself and metaphorically feeding yourself, that starts to slide. And all these things, by the way, don't necessarily happen on consecutive days. They can all be happening at the same time.
I was just thinking as you're talking, I'm like, there's been so many times that I've done that. A typical one that I'm sure other people do as well is I go to the gym in the morning, typically pre-work. The number of times I've stayed up too late the night before, whether it's work related or personal life related, and I've been doom scrolling until 1 a.m. or something, and therefore when my alarm goes off to go to the gym in the morning, I go, oh no, I'm too tired, I just don't want to do it. And I know full well that going to the gym makes me feel better, and when I miss it I feel groggy and I don't start my day in the way that I prefer to. But that behavior exactly of ignoring the needs, and I think especially activities just separately like doom scrolling, I think often happen when you are kind of in that freeze nervous system state. You don't know what you're doing, so just
absolutely the fight and the flight are commitments to action. Once you've decided to fight, there's no coming back. And once you've decided to run, there's no coming back. Whereas the freeze is the kind of like the most common, because it's you don't have to commit. I mean, it might mean you get eaten alive, but you that's why we have those moments, and most people have had them at least once in their life where they just literally didn't know what to say. They've just been frozen in a place of it's because it's normal. It's because it's part of who we are. So if that is then filled with that distraction technique of the doom scrolling, it's legitimate because it will be a response to something, an avoidant response.
And just sort of, I can't be bothered to make a decision, or I don't have to make a decision.
So then going back to the leader manager who brings that person in and says, I've noticed this, and the person B who says, well, there's nothing wrong, I'm fine, I'm completely fine. It's an investment in maintaining that status quo and not having to examine it, because you're in that groove and you're on that journey and you're getting something out of it at this early stage of burnout. You're getting some satisfaction, personal, or it could be external. validation of like, I was just so grateful. Thank you so much for staying so late last night. And you think, oh, that's a nice little stroke for my ego, or I've done a good job with the boss now thinks I'm great. So there'll be lots of different reasons why we might be invested and want to avoid any kind of conflict or any challenge around that. So starting to tell our version of the truth, shall we say, when someone is expressing concern. There are, again, multiple reasons why we might do that. Might not want to feel vulnerable in front of that other person, but it's worth noticing that when you are clearly not fine because you're exhausted or overstretched or starting to drop balls, whatever it is, and the answer to the question of, what's going on, or is there anything I need to know, is nothing, we will have an awareness of that. So again, it's noticing that in ourselves. So yeah, as I've talked about, just that denying of a problem, so avoiding conflict and denying of a problem. And then, again, this also connects, you can sort of see as they build, as the layers build, how interconnected they all are, the withdrawal from our normal society. Because it'll be different for everybody. Some people might be introverted and not be part of many things because that's not where they get their energy. So whatever it looks like for you, that withdrawal, I think this is it's quite hard to give language to in a funny sort of way, because you don't notice it's happening. But it might be that I would say, oh no, I can't come to see that movie with you, Alice, because I've got to work. Do I have to work? But I'm now in that groove of working like that. And my expectation internally is, well, I might need to work.
Yeah.
So I start to withdraw from the things that nourish me.
Yeah, would have previously brought you joy.
And also isolate.
Yeah.
And again, I'll ask you now because you're in the room with me. Does that something?
Definitely, yeah. I think so. I'm quite an extroverted person, generally speaking, although probably introverted in some ways. And yeah, anytime, if I'm feeling low or if I'm feeling busy or stressed, withdrawal is the immediate one. I feel like it almost feels compulsive because it's like your body's just going, okay, let's just remove ourselves for a minute so we can take a breather, and then you never end that breather because you then just get sucked in.
Brilliant way of putting it. And again, it connects really deeply to the next one, which is this depersonalization, this separation of yourself from the world.
Yeah.
Which sounds really, really melodramatic. And it's not when it's happening. It's quite discreet.
Yeah.
It literally is just like the next stage of isolation. And it can be that your life just shrinks.
Yeah.
Essentially, that it goes to literally work, sleep, repeat. That is just not good for anyone.
Yeah, not great.
It is. And then the expectations of our horizons also shrink. So then it stops being possible to do other things because we've lost, say, confidence in being able to, or you've been out of the loop for so long. So it starts to kind of like just create a real spiral in there.
Like your world becomes very small. And
absolutely. And that can lead to just inevitably, for me anyway, a sort of feeling of emptiness and feeling low because my world is a bit unexciting now, and so, but it's grown that way, if that makes sense. I've been part of that. But what I would say with all of this in relation to my personal experience in recent years is that the project that took me to burnout, and I didn't resign or anything like that, but I woke up to it quite late in those stages, was my project.
Oh, no way.
I had ownership of it. I designed it. I was delivering it. It was all mine. On paper, it couldn't have been any better. And I got enormous pleasure and satisfaction and was really successful in that project. It was a huge success. It won an award. It was, praised, and I got incredible feedback week in, week out. So it wasn't a bad thing. And I think the thing that is important to remember about burnout is that we can brand it as something that's about an awful job or an awful boss or an awful organisation or an awful project. But actually, a lot of the time, we can burn out because we have this honeymoon phase at the beginning of a project. We're really enthusiastic about it. We love what we're doing, and we get carried away with that. So we have, what I really want to stress is that there is some personal responsibility in there, because we can actually be complicit in that process as well as the more sort of standard imagination of a burnout situation, which is it's something to do with external pressures and too much being expected of us and shrinking deadlines and resources and I'm burnt out from this job and it's all your fault.
Exactly. I know. It's funny because it makes total sense when you're saying it. Like when you initially talk about burnout, I think a lot of people have that picture that you've just painted. When you're talking about it being your own project that led you to burnout, it makes total sense because you think, what would you feel the most compelled to keep doing other than something that you enjoy? And I had a similar thing in a previous job. I got really burnt out because I was making a podcast series during lockdown and it was about diversity and inclusion, and I loved the whole process of it. I loved interviewing people, editing it, and I'd be working really late because I loved it. But I feel like I'm picturing sort of a manager who potentially has an employee who is kind of aware that they're burning out, but it's like, I love what I'm doing, I'm fine, I want to keep doing it. And I can see how the temptation might be, okay, fine, keep doing it then. Like if you love it and you're still doing the work, keep going. But as you said at the start, ultimately further down the line, there will come a point. I feel like that much. We said stress is inevitable. This is inevitable. I feel that there will come a point where something else suffers. Burnout, especially, is business critical. If people are signed off work for stress and burnout, it does affect performance. So you sort of, it's counterproductive really to keep someone going just because they can, whereas further down they might not be able to anymore, and then you're in the same place you would be in now. So
yeah. And I think the temptation, the seduction is that it in the short term it benefits the business and it benefits the individual because they're growing, they're taking on more tasks, they're ambitious, they want to learn, and so it benefits everybody for that person to be and then rewarded by being given more work. That's the other thing, is that we all want to recruit ambitious people, we want to nurture ambitious talent, but the seduction is that we take our eye off the ball with what the ultimate consequences of that are. And the learning, part of the learning in any role, in any organisation, is about self-regulation and learning your own boundaries and your own limits. And that can be hard because that's when you have to start, going back to our previous conversation, you have to start putting some boundaries in place for the benefit of the project or the business. Ultimately, we are a resource in the workplace and we have to protect our most precious resource. And we do that with our cars. We do that with our washing machines. We take out insurance. We get a boiler serviced every year. We're not allowed to drive a car unless it's had an MOT and preferably a service. Or having a bald tyre. These are the things that really matter. We're not going to get in the car and drive on the motorway with a bald tyre. Not only do we put ourselves at risk, but we're breaking the law. So there are measures put in place in other parts of our lives to make sure that literally our vehicles don't burn out. So I think that there are two ways to look at it. There's the what do we need to do? How do we take responsibility for that? Because we know ourselves and we know our own signs. And a lot of these signs are invisible until you're at least halfway through that list. And if they are visible, they're rewarded. So both for ourselves and as leaders, in terms of having a real hyper awareness of that, in terms of spotting it and making sure that we are as leaders teaching our direct reports to self-regulate. Because I've noticed that you were here till 8 o'clock every night last week, and it's fantastic that you're loving this so much, but I want you to keep loving it for the next 3 months. And teaching that person to take that seriously as well.
It's where you kind of get into that cultural conversation of, like you said, rewarding productive behaviours. Of course, it's great to be productive, but we need to have the same approach to restful behaviours and restorative behaviours as well. Like we've mentioned when we were talking about resilience previously, whatever that looks like, taking a walk, like, I don't know, picking up a hobby or meditation, whatever it is, instilling that into company culture as well, so that you're actually rewarding when people are recognising that they need to rest or have a moment, even if it's just, I need to go and make a cup of tea and just do something else for 10 minutes or whatever.
I'm going to encourage people to Google balance wheel, because there are lots and lots of images that you can use. So balance wheel is a really good way as an audit of your life to check in and make sure your life is in balance. Because one of the things about burnout and stress is that, I said earlier, our world becomes quite narrow. So we lose sight of the things that we're losing. And we wake up one day and think, I've just spent £450 on one swim at the gym or whatever it is after a year. So we lose sight of that. It slips away from us. And a balance wheel is an exercise that I would encourage people to do, preferably with someone else, because they can challenge you, but it's entirely possible to do it on your own. Essentially, it's a wheel that looks like a Trivial Pursuit pie. So it's a wheel with 8 sections, and each section is labelled with a title. So the titles are career, money, health, friends and family, significant other, personal growth, fun and recreation, and physical environments. So those are the ones on my balance wheel here. And it's got 10 gradients in each piece of the pie. And you literally just draw a line out of 10 where you think each of those sections is reflected in your life. And what you end up with is a weird looking sort of line that goes around the circle like that. But what you can see immediately is what's missing.
Yeah.
So what you have let go of. And for someone who's on the track to burnout, I can almost guarantee that health and fun and recreation are the 2 that are going to be really low.
Yeah.
And possibly friends and family if you stop seeing people. But career will be really high.
Yeah.
Finance might be really high as well because you might be getting bonuses, who knows, but you're not spending any money anywhere else, are you? Because you're not going out, so you might be feeling quite flush.
Yeah.
But what it does, if you program it in and put it in as an annual event in your calendar that pops up, says do the balance wheel, it can take 15 minutes. But the reason it's good to do in pairs is that you can then talk about it.
Yeah.
And if your balance wheel says that you're 1 out of 10 on fun and recreation, I might say to you, what's happened?
Yeah.
Then the final question in any conversation about the balance wheel is pick one area, the lowest area of all, and what's the one thing you're going to do, back to your 1%, what's the one thing you're going to do to move that up from a 1 to a 2?
Yeah.
And make that commitment with another person in the room who holds you accountable. And it might be like, oh, I'm going to join the gym and I'm going to do it next week. And I'm going to say, right, well, I'll check in with you next week and find out whether you did it.
Yeah.
That's the benefit of doing it with someone. But balance wheel audit and exercise is a great way to just call yourself out on some of those slip slidey behaviours that we can get into that can lead to situations.
Ones that are really sort of insidious, like you said, that you don't notice you're doing. It's probably also good to have someone else because you might be in denial about something, or I think I'm doing great in our relationship. Oh, are you sure about that? You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it might be for the people I mentioned earlier, the Jacindas and the Jurgens and the Chris Packhams and Joe Wicks. It might be that the result of an audit like that, or of getting ill, because that's the other thing that happens is people get ill.
Yeah.
They get physically ill, they can't recover. They might have psychological problems, health problems, which means that they have to be signed off with what we call stress, which is this hideous catch-all title. But actually the nuance is so much more important. So you want to put that circuit breaker in before that happens.
Yeah.
And that an exercise like that, and also amongst colleagues, you don't have to be a boss to say to a colleague, do you want to just walk around the block with me at lunchtime, and then say, I've just noticed that you've been here really late a lot. Is everything all right? That's a really lovely way to sort of demonstrate the fact that you've noticed something and that there might be a conversation to be had about what's going on.
Yeah, in a more relaxed setting as well, so it feels like there's less pressure around it.
So the balance wheel is a useful exercise to do on a regular basis. Regular can be whatever you want it to be, but it's also a particularly useful thing to do when you're in the midst of a really big piece of work, or to be aware of. And it can be quite good to have it maybe pinned up or taped somewhere, just so that it's in your line of vision. As you can see, I'm quite good with my visual cues. But another circle, which is a pie chart this time, actually backs up the value of the balance wheel, and that is about our happiness set points. Now, I'm not going to claim this to be my own. No one knows who came up with the balance wheel, so everyone can claim that one. But this is the result of some research that was done by a woman called Sonia Lyubomirsky, who wrote a book about how to be happier. And what she proposes, based in science and based on research, so it's not just making this up and plucking it from the air, is that 50% of our DNA dictates our happiness set point. So it's in us with no influence or control. It's a genetic thing in terms of where our I feel I can see it very strongly in my husband. He's somebody who's naturally just very happy, and just quite a content person.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that, again, you can probably think of at least one person in your life. If not, we have a wide circle, don't we? So you'll be able to sort of get a sense of certain people just feel like they're just easygoing.
Yeah.
They just seem to be easily pleased and not very bothered. So 50% of that, based on that research, is genetic. 10% of our happiness is based on what happens to us, things that are out of our control, which leaves that 40% is where we have agency. We can be happier by 40% if we engage with it.
Yeah.
Which is really surprising for a lot of people, because when we're absolutely up against it and everything feels overwhelming and out of control, it's really easy to make it all about the external. It's
Someone
what's being
else's
done,
fault,
someone
yeah.
else's fault, or it's what's being done to me. But in the midst of that, the science tells us, the research tells us that we still have agency. And by looking at something like the balance wheel and thinking about all the things we talked about around how we build resilience and how we create resilience within our working and personal lives, it's about getting that balance of mind, body and soul, really. You know, what are we doing physically to look after ourselves? How are we feeding ourselves? How are we stimulating ourselves? How are we nourishing ourselves and nurturing ourselves in terms of the activities that we do? All of that shows up in the balance wheel in a more forensic way.
Yeah.
And that's all the stuff that sits within that 40%.
It's so interesting because you're right. It does. I think a lot of the time, and again, I'll include myself in this. There is that tendency to push outwards and be like, "Oh, well, I'm miserable because this, and this is happening," and completely remove yourself from the scenario. Yeah, and there's a temptation to just make it all about things, like you said, that are happening to us. And I feel like that's evident as well when you're talking about sort of what things in your personal life nourish you, like mind, body and soul. I think a lot of the time we look for this in our jobs completely, and maybe it's actually more about what we're doing for ourselves outside of work.
Yeah. Easily done, because we spend a third of our life at work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a long amount of
Yeah.
time. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank
It's
you.
been lovely talking through all this, and hopefully we'll have you on again at some point.
Yes, go off and do your balance wheel.
I will do.